Welcome, dear listeners, to a journey that will transport us through the moss-covered stones of beautiful Bruges, where love blooms even in the darkest gardens of the soul. This is the story of Marguerite, a young woman marked by life, but blessed with an inner strength that not even the cruelest of winters could freeze. Sometimes the scars we carry on our faces are merely reflections of the wounds we've healed in our hearts. In 1874, when carriages echoed through the frozen canals of Bruges, a profound truth was about to be revealed, that true beauty is not found in what we see, but in what we feel. Before we embark together on this narrative, tell me, from where are you joining us this afternoon? Write in the comments your city, for each place has its own poetry, just as our protagonist will discover. If this story touches your heart like a gentle harp strumming in the wind, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. This way, more people can discover that even the most wounded souls can find their spring. Year 1874. Harsh winter in Bruges, Belgium. Location, Beaumont Mansion, a stately residence of grey stone embraced by the mist of the canals. The December wind carried with it more than the aroma of roasted chestnuts from the streets of Bruges. It also carried the echo of hurried steps through the dark corridors of the Beaumont Mansion. Marguerite glided through the north wing gallery like a ghost, familiar with its own hauntings, her long fingers absently tracing the golden contours of ancestral frames. At 23, she had learned the art of invisibility. Her brown hair, always pulled back in a severe chignon, framed a face where a scar serpentined from the left temple to the corner of her mouth, a perpetual reminder of that fateful afternoon when she was 12, when fire had devoured her father's library, and she, in reckless courage, had tried to save the beloved volumes. The entire mansion bustled with preparations. Madame Céline Beaumont, a widow for 8 winters, commanded the servants with military precision that would make Napoleon's generals envious. Her gloved hands gestured in the cold air as she directed the positioning of greenhouse flowers and the polishing of silver. "Marguerite," the maternal voice cut through the silence like a sharp blade. "Where are you hiding, child? We have a visitor of utmost importance arriving, and I cannot allow you to show yourself." Marguerite's heart contracted like a rose touched by frost. Through the fogged window, she watched her sister Isabel in the garden, her golden hair dancing in the wind as she picked the last roses of the year. At 19, Isabel was everything Marguerite could never be. Perfect, immaculate, the kind of beauty that men would cross oceans to behold. In the improvised atelier of the attic, Marguerite took refuge among her watercolors. Her hands, which trembled before the curious gazes of the world, became steady and sure when they wielded the brush. On the canvases, she created worlds where imperfections transformed into poetry, where scars were merely golden veins in precious porcelain. The distant sound of horse hooves echoed through the stone courtyard. The visitor had arrived, and with him, a turn of events that would forever change the silent destiny of the shadow daughter of the Beaumonts. But who would this man be whose name was whispered in reverent tones throughout Bruges? Twilight painted the canal waters violet when the black carriage crossed the wrought iron gates of the Beaumont Mansion. The golden coat of arms on the door, an eagle with spread wings, gleamed like a promise in the dying light of day. Henri de Montclair descended from the vehicle with the grace of one who had learned to navigate the world without seeing it. His navy blue cape rippled in the cold wind, and his ebony walking stick, carved with military symbols, touched the courtyard stones in a measured rhythm, like music known only to him. At 29, the Duke bore in his features the mark of those who had looked death in the eyes and chosen to live. The wounds of the Franco-Prussian War had taken his sight, but not his dignity. Every movement revealed military discipline. Every gesture contained the poetry of one who had learned to feel the world through his hands. Madame Céline received him in the great hall, where the fireplace flames danced over Persian rugs and Sèvres porcelain. Isabel, strategically positioned next to the piano, embodied the personification of domestic perfection, a blonde angel framed by the golden light of candles. "Your Excellency," murmured Madame Céline, making an elaborate curtsy, "welcome to our humble abode. Allow me to present my daughter, Isabel." The young woman approached like a ballerina, her steps nearly inaudible on the marble. When she spoke, her voice sounded like honey poured over crystal. Henri inclined his head politely, but his fingers drummed lightly on the handle of his walking stick, a gesture that Marguerite, observing from the shadows of the staircase, recognized as contained restlessness. François, the Duke's assistant, a thin, middle-aged man, whispered something in his ear. Henri nodded and asked to see the library, as he wished to feel the soul of a house through its books. Madame Céline hesitated for an imperceptible moment. The library had been rebuilt after the fire, but still carried the memory of that terrible day. "Naturally, Excellency. Isabelle will be delighted to accompany you." But when Henri headed toward the library, something in his sure steps suggested he already knew the way, as if the walls whispered secrets that only the blind could hear. From the top of the staircase, Marguerite watched him disappear into the corridor that led to her secret sanctuary, and for the first time in years, she felt her heart accelerate with something that wasn't fear. What strange magic would this be that made a blind man walk as if he could see directly into the soul of things? The reborn library of the Beaumonts kept secrets among its oak shelves. There, where flames had once danced a destructive waltz, new books now coexisted with salvaged volumes, creating a symphony of aromas. New leather, ancient parchment, beeswax, and that indefinable perfume that only written words can exhale. Marguerite had taken refuge in that sanctuary, silently returning a volume of Voltaire to its place when the soft sound of the walking stick on marble announced a presence. Her fingers closed around the book, and she crouched behind the tallest bookshelf, hoping the visitor would pass by. Henri de Montclair stopped before a small table where a bronze sculpture rested, a horse in movement, its mane seeming to undulate in an eternal breeze. His long, aristocratic fingers traveled over the curves of the piece with almost religious reverence, reading with his hands what his eyes could not see. "Belleza," he murmured in French, and his voice carried a melancholy that made Marguerite's heart tighten. "Even blind, I can feel when something has been created with love." The young woman remained motionless, holding her breath, but the ancient floor betrayed her with an almost inaudible groan. Henri turned his head toward the sound, and a gentle smile curved his lips. "You needn't hide," he said softly. "Shadows are friends to those who have learned to live without light." Marguerite emerged slowly from her hiding place, the book still pressed against her chest like a shield. Henri remained facing her direction, but his eyes, a deep blue like the sea at dusk, gazed at a point slightly to the left of where she stood. "Voltaire," he observed, recognizing the sound of the pages. "Un homme qui pensait avec le cœur," a man who thought with his heart. "Oui," Marguerite responded in French, surprising herself with her own boldness. "Il croyait que l'ignorance était le seul ennemi véritable." He believed that ignorance was the only true enemy. Henri's eyes lit up, and for the first time since his arrival, he truly smiled. "You speak French with the purity of one who loves the language, not merely masters it. That is rare." "I learned alone," confessed Marguerite, her voice barely above a whisper. "Books were my teachers." Henri tilted his head, intrigued. For long minutes they conversed about literature, philosophy, art. Marguerite forgot her scar, her shyness, lost in the intoxication of a mind that understood her own intellectual passions. "Mademoiselle," Henri finally said, "my assistant François has difficulties with scholarly pronunciation. Would you accept to read for me some evenings? It would be a work of charity for a soldier who lost more than sight in the war. I also lost the music of well-pronounced words." Marguerite felt the world tilt on its axis. Never had anyone asked such a thing of her. Never had anyone seen value in her voice, in her presence. I don't know if it would be appropriate." "Literature," Henri said, touching the bronze sculpture again, "is like this piece. Its true beauty only reveals itself when touched by the right hands." But at the library door a blonde shadow moved, and Isabelle had heard every word of the conversation. How would the perfect daughter react upon discovering that the Duke preferred the company of the marked sister? The winter nights in Bruges acquired a new cadence at the Beaumont mansion. At precisely 8 o'clock, when the last bell of the Basilica of the Holy Blood echoed over the snow-covered rooftops, Marguerite made her way to the reading room in the West Gallery. There, in a burgundy velvet armchair positioned near the fireplace, Henri waited with the patience of one who had learned to savor each moment. His hands rested on a copy of Baudelaire, fingers tracing the pages as if they could absorb poetry through touch. Marguerite sat in the opposite chair, always maintaining a respectful distance between them, and opened the book he had chosen. Her voice, which during the day took refuge in silence, at night gained wings and transformed into an instrument of pure music. "L'Albatros," she began on a particularly heavy snow night, and Baudelaire's words flowed from her lips like a river of dark honey. Henri closed his eyes, an unnecessary but instinctive gesture, and lost himself in the perfect cadence of pronunciation, in the way she made each syllable dance in the cold air. Between one poem and another, they conversed. Henri told her about the war, about the moment when shrapnel stole his sight as he tried to save a fallen companion. He spoke of sculpture, of how he had learned to mold bronze and marble with his hands alone, creating forms that his visual memory guided. Art, he said, is the only truly universal language. I don't need to see a sculpture to understand its soul. Marguerite, in turn, spoke of her painting, of how colors became emotions in her watercolors. She described the nuances of blue she used to paint melancholy, the golden tones she reserved for moments of hope. I would like to be able to see your works, Henri confessed, on a night when the full moon silvered the gardens. But perhaps you could describe them to me. It was thus that Marguerite began to translate her paintings into words, creating a new and intimate language between them. Each description was a revelation, each shared detail another thread in the invisible fabric that bound them. Isabelle, however, did not remain inactive. She had intensified her piano studies, and each morning the salon echoed with the most elaborate sonatas she could execute. In the late afternoons when Henri walked through the gardens, she appeared as if by chance, dressed in her most elegant attire, offering him her arm, and speaking of subjects she judged sophisticated. But Henri, though courteous, maintained an educated distance. His thoughts seemed always turned toward 8 o'clock in the evening, toward the soft voice that transformed words into silver birds flying through the reading room. Madame Céline observed everything with growing unease. What should have been a simple courtship, the Duke, enchanted by Isabelle, had transformed into something she could neither understand nor control. In the 4th week of readings, Henri made a request that would change everything. "Marguerite, would you do me the honor of accompanying me tomorrow to a literary salon at the Vanderberg residence? There will be public readings, and I would like to have by my side someone who truly understands the power of words." The invitation echoed through the house like silent thunder, and Isabelle, listening from the half-open door, felt something dark awaken in her perfect heart. What price would a perfect sister be willing to pay to regain her position of prominence? The morning frost covered the windows of the Beaumont mansion like crystallized lace when Madame Céline decided to confront the daughter she had always considered lost. She found Marguerite in the improvised atelier of the attic, where the diffuse winter light created soft shadows over the watercolors scattered across the table. "Marguerite," the maternal voice carried the coldness of a sentence. "We need to talk." The young woman did not raise her eyes from her painting, a canal landscape where white swans glided over pearl-colored waters. Her fingers continued moving the brush with the precision of one who had found in art her only form of prayer. "A marked daughter," continued Madame Céline, "cannot aspire to a war duke. Monsieur de Montclair is a hero of France, decorated by the Emperor himself. You are merely a shadow in this house, child, a shadow who should know her place." The brush trembled imperceptibly in Marguerite's hand, creating an unexpected ripple in the painted water. "Mother," she murmured, "he merely appreciates reading." "Men," said Madame Céline, with the authority of one who had been widowed young, "may entertain themselves with curiosities for some time, but in the end they always choose beauty. They always choose perfection. Isabelle is the future of this family. You are the past we try to forget." Through the streets of Bruges, however, other winds blew. In tea salons and morning markets, tongues spared no speculation about the French Duke, who preferred long solitary walks to the attentions of the beautiful Isabelle Beaumont. "They say he talks for hours with the marked sister," whispered Madame Dubois to her friend, while choosing Flemish lace. "The one who always hides behind her hair." "Poor man," responded the other. "Blindness must have affected his judgment as well. When he recovers his sight, he'll see his folly." At the mansion, Isabelle had transformed her efforts into a meticulous campaign. She had consulted her professor from the Brussels Conservatory about the most impressive pieces, ordered new dresses from Paris, and studied subjects that might interest a cultured military man. Each afternoon, when Henri returned from his walks along the frozen canals, she appeared in the main vestibule like a golden apparition. She spoke to him of music, politics, the latest cultural trends from Brussels, always maintaining that perfect smile that had conquered dozens of suitors. Henri responded with impeccable courtesy, but his fingers drummed on his ebony walking stick, a sign that Marguerite had learned to recognize as contained impatience. "Mademoiselle Isabelle has exemplary education," he commented to François one evening, "but talking with her is like admiring a perfectly manicured garden, beautiful, undoubtedly, but without surprises." The assistant, a discreet and observant man, merely nodded. He too had noticed how his employer transformed during the evening readings, how his posture relaxed, how a genuine smile replaced the mask of social politeness. In her canopy bed that same night, Marguerite remained awake until the bells tolled midnight. Her mother's words echoed in her mind like sharp blades. "You are the past we try to forget." Perhaps Madame Céline was right. Perhaps it was merely the pity of a noble man that kept her in those golden afternoons of reading. Perhaps. But then she remembered the way Henri smiled when she explained a passage from Baudelaire, the manner in which his eyes lit up when she described her paintings. There was something there that went beyond charity. Or was it merely the self-deception of a marked woman dreaming of impossibilities? The answer would come sooner than she imagined, and it would be crueler than any maternal warning. The Van der Berg residence, erected on the banks of the Magdalena Canal, shone like a golden lighthouse in the cold Bruges night. Its tall windows poured light onto the dark waters, where swans slept cradled by the whisper of waves against ancient stones. The monthly literary salon gathered the cream of Bruges society, prosperous merchants, minor nobles, rising artists, and ladies whose greatest occupation was dissecting others' lives with surgical precision. Marguerite accompanied Henri by the arm, feeling upon herself the weight of hundreds of curious gazes. She had chosen her simplest dress, a navy blue that echoed the color of the Duke's cape, and kept her hair pinned to disguise the scar. Even so, she felt exposed like an unfinished painting in a gallery of masterpieces. Henri, in turn, moved through the crowd with the natural elegance of one born for salons. His presence commanded immediate respect. Conversations interrupted when he passed. Ladies made deep curtsies. Men bowed in military acknowledgement. "Monsieur le Duc," approached Madame van der Berg, hostess with rosy cheeks and calculated smiles. "What an honor to have you among us, and this must be—" "Mademoiselle Marguerite Beaumont," Henri introduced, with a formality that didn't hide his affection. "One of the most refined intellectuals I have had the pleasure of knowing." The silence that followed was almost palpable. Discreet glances traveled over Marguerite's face, lingering on the scar like butterflies attracted to a dangerous flame. Whispers began to circulate through groups, words murmured behind fans and crystal glasses. Isabel, radiant in a golden silk dress that made her look like a Nordic goddess, approached the small improvised stage where the readings would take place. "My dear sister," she announced with a voice clear as crystal, "will honor us with a reading. I know the Duke greatly appreciates your interpretation of the classics." It was a perfect trap, disguised as homage. To refuse would be a public discourtesy. To accept meant exposing herself to the cruel scrutiny of Bruges society. Marguerite felt Henri's arm tense beside her. He had understood the nature of the maneuver, but could not intervene without causing a greater scandal. With legs trembling like aspen leaves, Marguerite made her way to the small stage. The silence in the room became absolute, broken only by the crackling of candles and the distant murmur of canal waters. She chose a poem by Victor Hugo, Demain dès l'aube, and began to recite in a low voice, almost whispering. But as the words flowed, her confidence grew. The beauty of the verses took hold of her, transforming her voice into an instrument of pure emotion. Demain, dès l'aube, à l'heure où blanchit la campagne, je partirai. The room remained hypnotized. Even the harshest critics found themselves touched by the sincerity of that interpretation, by the way she made each word carry its own weight of melancholy and hope. When she finished, the silence stretched like a cord about to snap. Then a female voice cut through the air like a razor. What a pity that such talent comes in packaging so deteriorated by life. The comment came from Madame Rossini, wife of a prosperous silk merchant, known for her sharp tongue and heart of stone. Muffled laughter echoed through the room, and Marguerite felt the world crumble around her. Henri clenched his fists, his face transforming into a mask of contained fury. Francois stepped forward, ready to intervene, but the Duke stopped him with an almost imperceptible gesture. Marguerite descended from the stage with the dignity of a dethroned queen, keeping her head high despite the tears that threatened to overflow. She crossed the room under gazes that mixed pity and cruelty, and headed for the exit. "Mademoiselle," Henri reached her at the door. "Don't let ignorance—" "Please," she whispered, "let me go. Please." And she disappeared into the cold night, leaving Henri alone with his fury and the certainty that something precious had been destroyed in that golden room. But the worst was yet to come, for Isabel had observed everything with calculating eyes, and in her perfect mind, a terrible plan was beginning to take shape. Winter tightened its claws on Bruges with uncommon ferocity, as if nature itself wanted to mirror the storm that stirred in the heart of the Beaumont mansion. Thick snow covered the gardens, transforming the paths into white rivers that led nowhere. Marguerite had taken refuge in her room after the humiliation at the literary salon, emerging only for silent meals and solitary walks to the atelier. Her watercolors acquired darker tones, stormy grays, blues deep as maritime abysses, touches of violet that suggested bruises of the soul. Henri, in turn, maintained the evening readings, but something had changed in the dynamic between them. Marguerite read with the same technical perfection, but her voice now carried a new distance, as if she were reciting from behind a veil. "Mademoiselle," he said, on a night when snow beat against the windows like ghost fingers, "what happened at the salon does not define who you are, doesn't it?" Marguerite closed the Verlaine book with excessive care. "Then why do I feel as if I had been stripped naked before all of Bruges?" "Because," Henri replied, "you still haven't learned that the opinion of small people can never diminish the greatness of the great." But his words, however gentle, could not heal the wound opened that night. And Isabelle, watching from her window Henri's comings and goings through the garden, decided that the time had come to act. Marguerite's diary rested in a drawer of her writing desk, protected only by a symbolic lock that a hairpin would easily open. Isabelle waited for her sister to leave for one of her melancholy walks and infiltrated the room like a golden cat in forbidden territory. The pages revealed terrible treasures for those who knew how to use them. There was Marguerite's soul laid bare, her fears, her hopes, and especially her feelings for Henri. "He looks at me as if I were beautiful," read one entry. "How is it possible that a man who doesn't see me is the only one who truly sees me?" On another page, "I fear the day when he recovers his sight, when his eyes rest upon my scar, when he sees the monstrosity I am, all this dream will dissolve like morning mist." Isabelle copied entire passages in Marguerite's handwriting. She had observed her sister write so many times that she knew every curve of her calligraphy. Then she added her own poisonous lines. "It's a cruel irony that a war hero should become attached to an emotional invalid like me. I know his kindness is merely disguised pity, but I pretend to believe because it's all I have. How pathetic I am." The letter was carefully aged with tea and placed among Henri's belongings, where François would find it when arranging his things. The assistant, a simple and loyal man, did not question the origin of the paper. He simply delivered it to his employer, with the innocence of one fulfilling his duty. Henri read the letter on a January morning, when the sun struggled to penetrate the dense clouds. His hands trembled as he recognized Marguerite's handwriting, as he absorbed words that seemed to confirm all his secret fears. Could it be true? Was all the connection between them based on an illusion on his part? Doubts infiltrated his mind like snow accumulating on windowsills. That night, for the first time in weeks, Henri cancelled the evening reading. François brought the message to Marguerite, who received it with confusion that quickly transformed into pain. "Did he say something?" she asked the assistant. "The Duke? Did he offer any explanation?" François, a man of few words and much respect, merely shook his head. Marguerite remained in the empty reading room, surrounded by the dancing shadows of the fireplace flames. The Verlaine book rested open in her lap, but the words swam before her eyes like golden fish in a turbid lake. Upstairs, Isabelle brushed her blonde hair before the mirror, smiling at her own reflection. But Henri, alone in his room, held the forged letter and tried to reconcile the cruel words with the sweet voice that had filled his nights with poetry. Something wasn't right, but what exactly? The truth lay buried under layers of manipulation, waiting for someone to have enough courage to excavate it. January dragged over Bruges like a wounded cat, leaving traces of ice on ancient stones and melancholy in the hearts of its inhabitants. The Beaumont mansion became a divided territory. Henri began to avoid the corridors where he might encounter Marguerite, and she, in turn, took refuge in the atelier like a hermit dedicated to art. Her watercolors acquired a new, almost wild intensity. The brushes danced over paper with an urgency that translated inner storms into dark colors, deep blues mixed with stormy grays, creating landscapes of desolate beauty that seemed to mirror her own soul. The aroma of paint and turpentine permeated the attic air, mixing with the scent of incense that Marguerite burned to warm the cold environment. It was in this improvised sanctuary that she hummed softly, nameless melodies that sprouted from her throat like pagan prayers. Henri, during his walks through the snow-covered gardens, always stopped under the atelier window. The wind carried to him fragments of that melancholy music, and something in his chest tightened with a familiarity he couldn't explain. "Monsieur le Duc," François approached on an afternoon when the sun struggled to show itself between clouds. "Forgive my boldness, but you seem disturbed since reading that letter." Henri continued walking, his steps leaving precise marks in virgin snow. "Words can lie, François, but the heart has its own language." The thin assistant nodded, though he didn't completely understand. He only knew that his employer had become a shadow of himself since the evening readings had ceased. Isabelle, in turn, had intensified her seduction efforts with the subtlety of a military strategist. She appeared in the main salon whenever Henri came down for dinner, dressed in creations that enhanced her Nordic beauty. She spoke of art, literature, music, demonstrating erudition she had cultivated specifically to impress him. "Monsieur le Duc," she said on a night when snow fell like frozen rose petals, "would you like to hear a sonata? I studied especially a Chopin piece that I believe you will appreciate." Henri nodded courteously, and Isabelle made her way to the piano with the grace of a ballerina. Her fingers glided over the keys with impeccable technical perfection, creating music that was beautiful, but cold, like crystal that sounds without warming the heart. During the performance, Henri closed his eyes and tried to lose himself in the melody, but what reached him was different. Superimposed on Isabelle's piano, his auditory memories captured that soft voice humming in the attic, that formless music that seemed to be born directly from the soul. "It was beautiful," he said at the end, because education demanded it. But his fingers drummed on the arm of the armchair, the sign that Marguerite would recognize as impatience. Madame Céline observed everything with growing satisfaction. The plan was working. Henri had distanced himself from the marked daughter and was beginning to notice Isabelle's evident qualities. Soon, very soon, there would be a marriage proposal that would restore the family's fortune and prestige. But in the attic, Marguerite was creating her masterpiece without knowing it, a watercolor where white swans floated on pearl-colored waters, while in the sky, golden clouds suggested promises of spring. It was a painting of hope, born from despair, of beauty extracted from pain, and she hummed while painting, a melody that floated through the cold air like a silent call, a prayer whispered for ears that had learned to listen beyond appearances. Henri stopped under her window that night, and for the first time in weeks he smiled. There was something in that music that not all the letters in the world could contradict. Truth was beginning to make its way through lies, like flowers that sprout between the hardest stones, but someone with enough courage to reveal it completely was still needed. Marie-Claire had served the Beaumont family since Marguerite was a child, with uneven braids and always scratched knees. At 40, the lady's maid maintained the discretion of a shadow and the loyalty of a guard dog, qualities that made her practically invisible to those who schemed in the mansion's shadows. It was this invisibility that allowed her to witness Isabelle copying Marguerite's diary on a morning when she thought she was alone in her sister's room. Marie-Claire observed through the door crack, her heart contracting as she understood the cruelty of the betrayal unfolding before her eyes. For days the maid carried the weight of that knowledge like a stone in her chest. She had seen Marguerite wither since the evening readings ceased, observed how the young woman took refuge more and more in painting, creating works of desolate beauty that broke the heart. The last straw came on a January afternoon, when Marie-Claire found Marguerite fainted in the atelier, surrounded by watercolors scattered on the floor and the acrid aroma of paint mixed with tears. "My child," whispered the maid, helping her sit up, "what have they done to you?" Marguerite raised her red eyes and found in Marie-Claire's maternal face the understanding she hadn't found anywhere else. "He abandoned me," she murmured, like a child's toy that lost its charm. It was then that Marie-Claire made a decision that would change everyone's destiny in the mansion. That same afternoon, when Henri returned from his solitary walk along the frozen canals, she intercepted him in the main vestibule. Her hands trembled, but her voice remained firm as rock. "Monsieur le Duc," she said, making a deep curtsy. "I need to speak with your excellency. It's about Mademoiselle Marguerite." Henri stopped, his heart accelerating inexplicably. "What do you have to say, Marie-Claire?" The maid looked around, making sure they were alone, then took from her apron a small book bound in blue leather. "This is my child's true diary," she said, extending it to Henri, "and I saw Mademoiselle Isabelle copying pages from it, adding words that weren't Marguerite's. Henri felt the world tilt under his feet. His hands trembled as he took the diary, and even without seeing the words, he could feel the difference in the paper's weight, in the ink's aroma. "François," he called, and the assistant appeared immediately. "Bring the letter you found among my belongings, the one you said you found on the floor." When both documents were side by side on the library table, truth emerged like sun after a storm. Marguerite's handwriting was delicate, fluid. That of the forged letter presented small differences that only careful examination would reveal. But it was the content that truly accused. In the original diary, Marguerite's words about Henri distilled pure tenderness, an admiration that had nothing pathetic or self-deprecating about it. "Today he said that my voice transforms words into music," read a true entry. "Is it possible that a marked heart can still inspire beauty in another heart?" Henri clenched his fists, cold fury taking hold of his chest. "Where is Mademoiselle Isabelle?" he asked with a voice too controlled. "In the main salon, sir," replied Marie-Claire, practicing piano. Henri headed to the salon with steps that echoed like war drums. He found there the entire family gathered, Madame Céline embroidering by the fireplace, Isabelle at the piano executing a Strauss waltz, and Marguerite. Marguerite was nowhere to be seen. "Mademoiselle Isabelle," Henri said, interrupting the music, "I would like to speak with you, and with the entire family." Isabelle raised her eyes, and for the first time in her perfect life, she felt fear upon meeting the Duke's icy gaze. "Of course, Monsieur le Duc," she replied with a voice that tried to maintain its usual sweetness. Henri placed both documents on the piano, the true diary and the forged letter. "Could someone explain to me," he said with terrible calm, "how words from Mademoiselle Marguerite's diary appeared in a letter addressed to me, mixed with accusations that never came from her pen?" The silence that followed was deafening. Madame Céline paled, Isabelle opened and closed her mouth like a fish out of water, and Marie-Claire from the door watched justice finally being done. "I," began Isabelle, but her voice died in her throat. "Silence!" The French word exploded from Henri's lips like a shot. "Don't insult my intelligence further with lies." And then, with a voice laden with disappointment that cut deeper than any anger, he proclaimed his sentence. "The only person in this house who possesses true nobility of character was cruelly betrayed by those who should protect her. This, ladies, is more than betrayal, it is an obscenity." Isabelle collapsed into a chair, her perfect face finally revealing the ugliness that inhabited her soul. And Henri, carrying the true diary against his chest, left in search of the only person in all of Bruges who deserved his apologies. But when he reached the atelier, he found only scattered watercolors and the aroma of tears mixed with paint. Marguerite had disappeared like a wounded bird seeking solitude to heal its broken wings. Henri de Montclair spent 3 days traversing every corner of Bruges, from the narrowest alleys of the medieval city to the towering spires of the Basilica of the Holy Blood. His ebony walking stick echoed through ancient stones like a search drum, and François followed him faithfully, understanding without words the urgency that consumed his employer. Marie-Claire had whispered clues: a nearby convent, a distant aunt in Ghent, a merchant cousin in Antwerp. But all the clues proved to be dead ends, and Henri began to fear that Marguerite had been lost forever in the cold mists of Flemish winter. It was on the 3rd day, when snow began to melt under a pale sun that announced spring's approach, that he found her. The Bruges Municipal Library was a silent refuge where students and scholars sought knowledge among dusty volumes. Henri entered guided by intuition. If Marguerite was anywhere in the city, it would be in a place where books offered solace for her wounded soul. He found her at a table hidden between philosophy shelves, copying by hand a Verlaine poem in a brown leather notebook. Her hair was loose, falling like a chestnut curtain that tried to hide her face from the world. "Mademoiselle Marguerite." She raised her eyes, and Henri saw in them the mark of 3 sleepless nights and tears that refused to dry. For a moment, she seemed ready to flee again, but something in his posture, the evident humility, the pain reflected in his features, made her remain seated. "Monsieur le Duc," she murmured, closing the notebook, "you shouldn't be here." "On the contrary." Henri approached slowly, like one approaching a wounded animal. "This is exactly where I should be, here where true words live in peace, far from the lies that poisoned my house." Marguerite lowered her eyes, and Henri saw a tear slide down the scar on her face, a crystal drop following the path of the old wound. "I know about the letter," he said softly. I know about the betrayal. I know that the cruel words never came from your pen." She raised her face, surprise mixing with timid hope in her eyes. "How? Marie-Claire. Her loyalty to you is greater than her fear of my anger. She brought me your true diary, and the differences are clear to those who know how to look." Henri pulled a chair and sat before her, placing his hands on the table, close enough for her to touch them if she wanted. "Marguerite," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "I love you." The words remained suspended in the silent air of the library like golden birds. Marguerite felt her heart stop, then accelerate in a mad race. "No," she whispered. "You can't. I am. You are the most extraordinary woman I have known." Henri leaned forward, his blue eyes seeking hers. "You are intelligence and sensitivity. You are courage disguised as shyness. You are beauty that transcends any physical imperfection. You are the music my soul has been searching for." Marguerite covered her face with her hands, sobbing softly. "But my scar, when you fully recover your sight—" "I have already partially recovered it," Henri confessed, and the revelation was like lightning in a clear sky. "Dr. Dubois, the specialist your mother consulted, also sought me out. An experimental surgery," he said. "I can already distinguish shapes, shadows, and when I look at you I see only light." Henri extended his right hand, and after a moment of hesitation, Marguerite allowed him to touch her face. His fingers traced the scar with the reverence of a sculptor, admiring a work of art. "This mark," he murmured, "is proof of your courage, of a girl who risked her life to save her father's books. How could I see ugliness in what is, in truth, evidence of a heroic heart?" Marguerite's tears transformed from pain into something she didn't dare name. "Marguerite Beaumont," Henri said, taking from his pocket a simple gold ring he had sculpted himself, "would you do me the honor of being my wife?" The library's silence enveloped them like a sacred mantle. Outside, the bells of Bruges tolled noon, and the golden light of approaching spring poured through the tall windows, blessing the moment when two wounded souls found and recognized each other. "Yes," whispered Marguerite, and the word was like the first bird's song after the longest winter. When Henri slipped the ring onto her finger, Marguerite knew that her life would forever be divided between the before and after of that moment, the moment when she learned that even the most wounded creatures can discover they are worthy of love. But outside the library, the tongues of Bruges were already beginning to weave a new tapestry of gossip, and the true test of their love was yet to come. Spring came to Bruges like a whispered promise, melting winter's last resistances and filling the canals with the renewed reflection of clearer skies. Henri and Marguerite's engagement had been announced discreetly, but shockwaves rippled through Bruges society like circles in disturbed water. At the Beaumont mansion, silence had settled in like a permanent tenant. Madame Céline kept to her chambers, consumed by shame and the loss of matrimonial hopes she had placed in Isabel. The golden daughter, in turn, withered like a cut rose. Her beauty remained intact, but her soul seemed to have wilted after her betrayal's exposure. Henri had established himself in an inn near the city centre, refusing to remain in the house where Marguerite had been humiliated. But he visited her daily, and together they planned a future that seemed to shine with hope's golden colours. It was on an April morning, when the first rosebuds appeared in the gardens, that Dr. Dubois arrived from Paris with his surgical proposal. "Monsieur le Duc," said the specialist, a man with greying beard and perspicacious eyes, "advances in ocular surgery have been extraordinary. Based on the injuries I examined, I believe we can restore about 70% of your original vision." The consultation took place in the mansion's library, with Marguerite seated beside Henri, their fingers intertwined in a union that spoke louder than any words. Dr. Dubois explained the procedure, with scientific details that seemed more art than medicine. "Success," he concluded, "is probable, but not guaranteed. And even in case of success, complete recovery will take several weeks." Henri nodded, but when he turned to Marguerite for support, he found only silent terror in her eyes. It's wonderful," she murmured, but her voice carried the tone of one pronouncing a death sentence. That night, after Dr. Dubois retired to the inn where he was staying, Marguerite remained awake until the bells tolled dawn. Beside her, Henri slept the sleep of the just, a gentle smile curving his lips as he dreamed of a future where he could see the face of the woman he loved. But for Marguerite, that future represented the end of everything. Madame Céline's words echoed in her mind like cursed echoes. "When he recovers his sight, he'll see his folly." No matter how much Henri protested eternal love, no matter how much he swore the scar was merely a detail, Marguerite couldn't believe that a man could truly love a marked woman when so many perfect ones were available. Isabelle's forged letter had merely been the materialization of her own fears, and now, with surgery approaching, those fears grew like shadows at dusk. Before dawn, Marguerite made her choice. She packed only the essentials, some clothes, her brushes and paints, the small money she had saved over the years by discreetly selling some watercolors. She left the engagement ring on the table, accompanied by a letter she wrote with tears streaming down her face. "My dear Henri, I flee not from cowardice, but from love. When you recover your sight and see my marked face clearly, you will understand that your heart was victim to your soul's kindness, not true love. I cannot bear to see disappointment in your eyes when reality replaces the dream. Be happy. Marry someone worthy of your light. Forever yours in soul, but never again in body. Marguerite." St. Catherine's Abbey lay 30 kilometers from Bruges, lost among lavender fields and small groves where silence was broken only by birdsong. Marguerite arrived there as the sun rose, exhausted and shattered, but determined to begin a new life, far from everything that could remind her of the love she had chosen to abandon. The Mother Superior, a woman with kind eyes and hands calloused by work, received her without questions. At the Abbey, women wounded by life found purpose teaching orphans and serving God through art and education. "Here," said the nun, leading Marguerite through silent cloisters, "you will find the peace your soul seeks." But in Bruges, Henri awoke to discover that the world had crumbled around him. The ring abandoned on the table spoke louder than any scream, and the letter broke his heart into fragments so small he wondered if he would ever be able to reassemble them. François found him still holding the paper, tears streaming down a face that had never seen his employer cry. "We'll find her," said the assistant with determination. "No matter where she went, we'll bring her back." But Henri shook his head, understanding something his heart refused to accept. Sometimes, true love requires letting go of what we love most, if that's what they believe they need to be happy. The surgery was performed as planned, and Henri partially recovered his sight. But when his eyes opened to the renewed world, the first thing he saw was the empty chair where Marguerite should have been sitting, and he understood that all the light in the world meant nothing if it couldn't illuminate the face of the woman he loved. 6 months passed like leaves carried by autumn wind, and Henri de Montclair became a familiar figure on the roads radiating from Bruges. With partially recovered vision, shadows and shapes defining themselves in his right eye while the left remained in darkness, he had hired investigators, questioned merchants, followed every clue that might lead to Marguerite. François remained by his side like a faithful shadow, watching his employer wither like a plant deprived of sunlight. Henri had grown thin, his noble features acquiring a melancholy that made people turn in the street, not because of his blindness, but because of the palpable sadness he carried like an invisible mantle. "Monsieur le Duc," François said on an October morning, when golden leaves danced in Bruges' frozen canals, "perhaps it's time to accept." "No," the word came out like a shot. "She's somewhere, François. And as long as I have strength to search, I won't give up." St. Catherine's Abbey had become, for Marguerite, a refuge where soul wounds healed slowly like broken bones. She taught painting to the institution's orphans, abandoned girls who found in colors and forms a language to express pains they didn't yet know how to name. Mademoiselle Margot, as they knew her there, had transformed the Abbey's old atelier into a space of magic. Her watercolors adorned the white walls like windows to more beautiful worlds, and her soft voice told stories that made children dream of golden futures. But at night, when the cloister's silence enveloped the Abbey like a sacred mantle, Marguerite remained awake, painting memory portraits. Henri's face as she remembered it, his aristocratic hands, the gentle smile that illuminated his features when she read to him. The Mother Superior watched her with growing concern. Marguerite had kept her word to dedicate herself entirely to the orphans, but there was a sadness in her that not even prayer could touch. "My child," she said on an afternoon when rain drummed on window panes, "there are wounds that only forgiveness can heal. And sometimes who most needs forgiveness is ourselves." It was on a November morning when mist covered the fields like a bridal veil that little Charlotte, an 8-year-old orphan with fire-colored hair and eyes green as emeralds, came running to Marguerite in the atelier. Mademoiselle Margot," she shouted, her steps echoing through stone corridors. "There's a man at the gates, a man with a walking stick who speaks French and asks about a lady who paints." The brush slipped from Marguerite's hands, leaving a blue stain on the watercolor she was working on. Her heart raced like a wild horse, and for a moment the world spun around her. How is he?" she asked with a trembling voice. "Tall and elegant," Charlotte described with children's precision. "Dark hair with silver threads, eyes like the sky before a storm. And a tiny scar here," she pointed to her own temple, "that he tries to hide with his hair." Marguerite covered her face with her hands. It was Henri. After all these months, he had found her. "Do you know him?" asked Charlotte, curious. "I knew him," whispered Marguerite, "a long time ago. He said he was looking for someone very special, someone who paints like angels and has a voice that transforms words into music." The girl tilted her head. "That's you, isn't it?" Tears ran down Marguerite's face as she nodded. "Should I tell him where you are?" offered Charlotte with the innocence of one who doesn't understand adult heart complexities. "No," said Marguerite, then hesitated. "Yes, I don't know." But Charlotte had already run off, her steps echoing through the cloisters like drums announcing destiny. Marguerite remained in the atelier, surrounded by her watercolors and the silence that preceded great storms. Outside, the abbey bells tolled noon, and she knew her life was about to change again. Henri was there. He had searched for her for months, crossed kilometers, ignored her farewell letter, but the question that tormented her remained unanswered. When he truly saw her, when his healed eyes registered every detail of her imperfection, would he still be able to love her? Steps echoed in the corridor, familiar steps that made her heart dance and tremble at the same time. The moment of truth had arrived. The atelier of St. Catherine's Abbey was bathed in golden afternoon light when Henri de Montclair crossed its threshold, guided by Charlotte's light steps. The familiar aroma of paint and turpentine enveloped him like a long-awaited embrace, and for a moment he was transported back to those mornings in the Beaumont mansion attic when he had first discovered that Marguerite possessed a talent that transcended any physical limitation. Marguerite stood with her back to the door, before an easel where a watercolor was taking shape. A lavender field under an infinite sky, painted with delicate brushstrokes that captured light like golden prisoners. Her hands trembled imperceptibly, and Henri knew she had sensed his presence. "Marguerite," he said softly, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer finally answered. She turned slowly, and Henri saw her for the first time with the clarity that surgery had returned to him. His right eye registered every detail, the brown hair longer now, loose over her shoulders, the thinner but still beautiful face, and yes, the scar that serpentined from temple to the corner of her mouth. But instead of the repulsion Marguerite feared to see in his eyes, Henri smiled with a tenderness that made her heart race. "Vous êtes plus belle que tous mes rêves," he murmured in French. "You are more beautiful than all my dreams." Marguerite instinctively covered the scar with her hand, but Henri approached and, with infinite delicacy, moved her fingers away. "No," he said softly, "never hide from me something that is part of who you are." His fingers traced the scar like a sculptor caresses his most precious work, and Marguerite felt tears stream down her face. "Henri," she whispered, You can see me now. You can see what I really am." "Yes," he replied, "and I see a courageous woman who risked her life to save her father's books. I see an artist who transforms pain into beauty. I see someone so generous that she preferred to sacrifice her own happiness rather than disappoint the one she loves." Henri pulled her to him, and for the first time in months, Marguerite allowed herself to rest against his chest. "But I also see," he continued, "an adorable fool who believed that true love could be shaken by something as superficial as a mark on the skin." "How can you be certain?" she asked, raising her eyes to meet his. "How can you know you won't change your mind when—" Henri silenced her with a kiss, the first kiss between them, laden with months of longing and the promise of all the tomorrows they could share. When they separated, he took her hands and said with a firm voice, "Marguerite Beaumont, I love you. I love your intelligence, your sensitivity, your courage, your compassion. I love the way you make words dance when you read, how you transform paint into poetry, how you care for these orphan children, as if they were your own daughters." Henri knelt before her, taking from his pocket the same simple ring she had left on the table months before. "I love every part of you, including and especially this scar that is proof of the extraordinary woman you became. Will you marry me, not despite your imperfections, but celebrating them, because they are part of the most perfect person I have ever known?" Around them, the Abbey's orphans had silently gathered at the atelier door, watching with wide eyes this scene that seemed taken from a fairy tale. Charlotte held the Mother Superior's hand, smiling as if she were personally responsible for that miracle. "Yes," whispered Marguerite, and the word echoed through the atelier like celestial music. "Yes, Henri, yes, forever." When Henri slipped the ring onto her finger for the second time, the orphans exploded in applause, and even the severe Mother Superior discreetly wiped away a tear. On that golden November afternoon, in the simplicity of an abbey atelier lost among lavender fields, Henri de Montclair and Marguerite Beaumont found something that all the salons of Bruges had not been able to offer: the absolute truth that true love doesn't see imperfections. It only sees beauty where others see defects. And Marguerite finally understood that she had spent her entire life waiting for someone to love her despite her scars, when what she needed was to find someone who loved her because they were part of her story, and that story, with all its pains and triumphs, was exactly what made her worthy of being loved. The watercolors in the atelier seemed to gain more vivid colors that afternoon, as if love itself had spilled over the canvases, transforming them into windows to a golden future where two wounded souls had learned that, together, they could heal any wound. The chapel of St. Catherine's Abbey had never witnessed a ceremony as touching as that December morning, when Gothic stained glass windows poured colored light over Henri de Montclair and Marguerite Beaumont. The orphans, dressed in their finest white dresses, formed an angelic choir that sang a medieval motet, their voices echoing through stone vaults like prayers ascending to heaven. Marguerite wore her own mother's wedding dress, an ivory silk creation that the nuns had lovingly altered, adding delicate lace that looked like spiderwebs kissed by dew. Her hair was loose, as Henri had requested, crowned by a simple tiara of wildflowers that Charlotte had woven the previous morning. Henri, in his military dress uniform, carried the two wedding rings he had sculpted himself in gold, simple but perfect circles, engraved with intertwined initials, and a small rose, symbol of beauty born from thorns. Dom Benedict, the abbot who had known Marguerite's father and had presided over the funeral 8 years before, officiated the ceremony with words that spoke of second chances and the redemptive power of true love. "Henri," said the religious man, "do you accept Marguerite as your wife, promising to love her in joy and sorrow, in health and sickness, honoring her as your soul's companion until death separates you?" "I do," Henri replied, his voice echoing through the chapel with the firmness of a promise carved in marble. "And I also promise to always see her as she truly is, the most extraordinary woman God has placed in my path." When Marguerite's turn came, her voice trembled initially, then gained strength. "I do, and I promise never again to doubt the love I see in your eyes, nor hide from you any part of who I am." The rings were exchanged while the orphans sang, and when Dom Benedict declared them husband and wife, Henri kissed his bride under a rain of rose petals that the girls threw from the choir. Francois, promoted to best man, discreetly wiped away a tear as he watched his employer finally find complete happiness. 2 years passed like golden pages of a poetry book. Henri had accepted the position of cultural attaché of France in Bruges, establishing residence in an elegant house near the Grote Markt, the pulsing heart of the medieval city. There, the couple transformed the salons into spaces where art and literature flourished. Marguerite had created an atelier on the second floor, where she received young artists and offered painting classes to girls from working families. Her own works had found recognition. Her watercolors were sought by collectors who appreciated the unique sensitivity with which she captured light and emotion. Henri, in turn, had become a respected sculptor, specializing in monuments to war casualties. His pieces, created with hands that had learned to see through touch, possessed a moving humanity that touched all who contemplated them. At the Beaumont mansion, time had brought its own lessons. Madame Céline, impoverished after a series of failed investments, had accepted with wounded dignity the monthly pension that Henri and Marguerite offered. Isabelle had married a prosperous merchant from Antwerp, a kind but common man who loved her without truly understanding her past ambitions. On a spring afternoon, 5 years after that wedding at the Abbey, Marguerite was in her atelier painting when she felt familiar arms encircle her from behind. "How is our masterpiece doing?" asked Henri, gently kissing her neck. Marguerite smiled, placing her hands over her slightly rounded belly. "Growing strong and healthy. Doctor, Dubois says it might be twins." Henri spun her in his arms, his eyes, now with vision almost completely restored, shining with happiness. Boy or girl, he said, they will inherit the best of both of us. Your artistic sensitivity and my stubbornness in never giving up on what I love. Through the atelier window, they could see the gardens they had created together, a space where wild roses grew alongside cultivated flowers, where organized beauty coexisted harmoniously with the spontaneous. Sometimes, murmured Marguerite, I feel as if all the pain of the past was necessary to lead us to this moment. Scars, Henri replied, delicately tracing the mark on her face, are just maps that show where we've been. But love is the compass that guides us to where we need to go. When the bells of Bruges tolled dusk, the couple remained embraced before the window, watching the city that had witnessed their story of pain transformed into joy. Months later, when Alexandra and Camille came into the world, twins with blue eyes and brown hair who seemed to carry within them the best of both parents, Marguerite finally understood that she had found something she had never dared dream. A family where imperfections were celebrated, where differences were seen as gifts, and where true love not only healed old wounds, but created new beauties. In the atelier transformed into a nursery, while she lullabied the children to the sound of bells echoing over Bruges's golden canals, Marguerite smiled, remembering that wounded girl who hid in the shadows of the Beaumont mansion. That girl had grown and become a woman who learned the most important truth of all, that we are loved not despite our imperfections, but because of the totality of who we are. Scars, fears, dreams, and everything else that makes us unique and precious. And on the room's walls, her most recent watercolors captured this truth in colors that seemed to sing. Golden tones of hope, deep blues of serenity, and soft greens of growth and renewal. It was the art of a woman who had found her true home, not in stone walls but in the heart of someone who saw her exactly as she was, and loved her exactly for that. When Henri joined her that night, watching the children sleep under the soft candlelight, he whispered, "Thank you for teaching me that true vision doesn't happen with the eyes, but with the heart." And Marguerite replied, "Thank you for teaching me that true beauty isn't in the absence of scars, but in the courage to show them to someone who will know how to love them." Thus ended the journey of the shadow girl who became a duchess, not because she found someone who transformed her, but because she found someone who saw her as she had always been, perfect in her imperfection, beautiful in her vulnerability, and worthy of all the love the human heart can offer.